So we have our broker service running in the background, and now we want to modify our front end to try to hit that broker service. I just want to make sure I can send a request there and have my broker service respond with some kind of JSON. Okay, so we have the broker part done, the broker service. So now we need to go back to our front end and open the templates folder, and we're going to open test.page.go.html. Now, this is nothing more than simple old JavaScript, so this shouldn't be too hard at all. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is add a button. So right here on line 8 in my code, after the horizontal rule, I'll add an A, and its ID will be, say, broker BTN, like that. So we give it an ID, broker button. And I'll use some bootstrap classes to make it look okay. So class button, button-outline-secondary. And I'll give it an href equal to, I don't want it to do anything, so I'll just say JavaScript :void with 0 in parentheses. And I'll close my opening A tag and say test broker. And close my A tag. Okay, so now I have something to click on. So now I'll go down to the JavaScript section, and the first thing I'll do is get a few references. So we'll get a reference to the broker button, say let broker btn equal document.getElement by ID, and I'm looking for broker btn, which is the ID I gave it. So there's a reference to that. And I also want to get references to the output section here that has an ID of output. And this div, this pre-tag, which has an ID of payload, and this pre-tag, which is an ID of received. So I'll get references to those. So we'll say let output equal document.getElement by ID. I'm looking for output. So now I have a reference to that. Let sent equal document.getElement by ID. And that one's called sent. Actually, it's called payload. Payload. And we'll let received equal document.getElement by ID, and that one's called received. Okay, so now I have references, 4 references I can work with. So let's put a listener on our broker button that listens for clicks. So broker button dot add event listener, and the event I'm listening for is click. And when someone clicks on it, execute this function. Okay, so what do I want to do here? Well, obviously I'm going to be making a fetch post, and I'm going to fetch to localhost :8080. So let's write the fetch statement, and then we'll clean it up a little bit afterwards. So I'll declare constant body, because that has to be a post request, and I'm going to make this method post. And that's all I'm going to put in there. I'm going to post an empty body, okay? And now I make the fetch statement. Now, fetch. You may be used to writing things like this, http:// and then whatever you want. But because this is actually a Golang template, I find that causes me grief sometimes. So instead, I write it like this, \/ \/ like that. And then I put localhost, which I have to spell right, localhost port 8080, and there's nothing else required because that's the full path of the full URL we specified in our routes file in the broker service. And then I put in there body as the second parameter. Then, once I get this, I'll get my response, and I'll convert it into the format I needed to work with. That's response.json. Then, at this point, I have some data, and I'll use an arrow function, and close the arrow function. So after I get this, the first thing I'm going to do is set sent to its inner HTML, just to change the contents of that pre-tag to empty post request. That's what I'm sending, okay? And then we'll say received, which I have a reference to right there in line 38, dot inner HTML. That's equal to, and I'm going to actually format the JSON, and I'm going to do it, the JSON I'm getting back, by saying JSON.stringify, and I'm going to stringify data, and I'm going to give it 2 optional parameters. The first one I'm not going to deal with, so I'll just say undefined. And the second one is the number 4, and that will give me nicely formatted JSON when I get it back, okay? And now I'll check for an error, because we potentially could get an error. So if data.error, if that's set to true in the JSON that I get back, then I'll do one thing. Otherwise, I'll do something else. And what am I going to do if I have an error? Well, what I'm going to say is console.log error, console.log data.error, data.message, I guess it is. That's all I'm going to do if something goes wrong. And I'll watch the console the first time I hit this. But if things go right, I'm going to change output.innerHTML, change the output div by saying plus equals. I'll add to what's already there, and then I'm going to use JavaScript templates with this backtick, that button just below the escape key on most keyboards, and I'll add some HTML to it. So a line break, and then strong, and then say response from broker service, close the strong tag, and a colon, and then $, and then in curly brackets, data.message. Okay? So, the last thing to add to a fetch statement, and it's always good practice to add this, is a catch. So .catch, and I'm going to be catching an error, and I'll use an arrow function, and close my curly brackets. And in here I'll just say output.innerHTML, inner HTML plus equals to add to it, to append to it. And I'll just put in 2 line breaks, br, br, and then I'll put in error and a space, and then just append the error to it. And there's no parentheses. Okay, so I should be able to run this. So let's open our terminal, get up 1 level and into the front end folder, and just say go run./cmd/web. Okay, so I have that running, and I have my Docker image running in the background because I ran Docker Compose last lecture. So let's go to a web browser and reload this page, because I still have it here. Otherwise, just go to localhost port 80, and I'll open the JavaScript console just so I can see if there's any errors. Let's run it. So I'll click on my test broker button. Sent.innerHTML is not a function, so that's going to throw me off. Let me go back here and fix that. At least I know the error part works. That should be an equal sign. I knew that. I must be low on caffeine today. Let's try that again. So I save that, go back to my web browser, reload the page, and try that again. Empty post request, and I got a response back. That's all I care about at this point. I can, in fact, communicate between my front end and my back end. Perfect! So let's move on to the next step.